Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We are so excited today to have a very special appearance from a longtime friend of the channel, the absolute formidable Mr. Nicholas Kole himself. Hi, Nick. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me back. Glad to be here.
We are so excited today to deep dive one of your newest contributions to Lorcana, the Enchanted Ursula card, Deceiver of All. It's amazing. You partnered with John Loren on this card, and we're so excited to dive into it with you.
First off, what was it like? Can you talk about your relationship with John and why this collaboration is so cool from that regard?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So John and I actually met at our very first job out of school, essentially. So way back, we're getting on like 15 years ago at this point. We worked for a company called 38 Studios, which was going to make the next big MMO that was going to unseat World of Warcraft. And of course, we all know that's what happened, and that's why I'm here. And who remembers
Absolutely.
World of Warcraft anymore? And the project was completely canceled. It was a huge, big, like, drama bomb, and there's that's a whole other video's worth of content someday. But John and I met. He was an animator at the time, and I was a fledgling concept artist. But he had like a passion for illustration and for sort of storytelling in 2D art. And so once that gig kind of closed up, we moved on to a local studio called Cloud Kid. I collaborated there and then just started batting around our personal projects. So I have a personal story project called Jellybots, which is kind of my own little playground space where I develop characters and story ideas for fun. And John was like a really instrumental part of just sort of throwing spaghetti against the wall, seeing what sticks, talking ideas back and forth from like the earliest days. And he was working on some children's book pitches that became children's books. So he's got Frankenstein Doesn't Wear Pajamas, and Hugo Sprouts, and I'm screwing up the title. Something. There's
and Strange Case of the Beans.
Strange Case. I was like, the mysterious case, the wondrous case. I couldn't remember what kind of case it was.
We may have a copy.
Excellent. I do too. I'm like looking in the back of the room because it's right over there somewhere. But so does my mom. I think one of the things that is probably indicative of John and I is that both our moms have each other's art hung up somewhere in their homes. Like my mom has John Loren art and his mom has Nick Kole art, like somewhere in their homes. So after that, I mean, we worked together on Crash Bandicoot, on Spyro the Dragon, on other secret projects I can't talk about, and now on Lorcana together. So we've really, like, the two of us have followed each other through like something like 5 or 6 different separate jobs to this point. So
That's incredible.
So what does it mean then to work with him on a Lorcana card on this new project that you both are involved in?
Oh, it's a joy. I mean, it's so cool to get to like directly collaborate. I think early on, I skipped a part where we worked on a webcomic for another since defeated game called Dawngate. We were doing a webcomic to tell the story of the characters of this MOBA game we were developing, and he and I worked directly together on that. That was like the main other time when I was doing line art and he was doing color and painting the backgrounds. And so that was like formative for both of us, just like myself learning how to talk about art ideas and communicate art direction, and likewise him like just kind of translating those visual principles into like literal paint strokes. And we made work I'm still really proud of. I feel really nostalgic about it. And that was around the time I did that Maleficent book as well. So like the art style that we were collaborating on was very much kind of in the genes of what later became Lorcana visually. So we were always like a pair of folks who aesthetically were going to work really well for this whole universe. So really, but we've mostly worked as colleagues just together, where we're both doing character design or illustration sort of side by side. But on this one, and I should say, this was John's card. So John was assigned this card and he was like, I would like to have some help and like think that I could make the timing work better if it wasn't just me. And so he brought me onto the card. So it was great when he sort of approached me with it. It was just the easiest thing to say yes to in the world. because we've been collaborating for so long. And then it was just a matter of figuring out like, okay, how do you want to do it?
Yeah. I think it's so incredible because, I mean, obviously y'all's history together and your personal friendship and working relationship, but then, both of your contributions to Lorcana, you creating kind of the face of Lorcana for the first set. And then John has become known as this artist who goes harder on any card than he needs to go. Like just absolute incredible piece after incredible piece. And so y'all partnering on this together is just really special. Sorry, I needed to say that. I didn't have
I think we both felt like we were in good hands. So it
Yeah.
was really like fun to work with somebody that you can just completely trust, and you're like, it's gonna turn out great.
Yeah.
We just need to figure out, the details as we go. I did actually ask him. I texted him before this. I was like, okay, if you're not going to come on this interview with me, like, do you want me to say anything? And first he said, well, I want to say that it was an honor. To which I say, that's ridiculous. The honor is mine. He invited me, so delete that. Forget that.
Okay.
I'm honored. And then he said that the division of labor was sort of such that John was kind of the writer and I was kind of the director on the card. So it was kind of, he was laying down some of the text, as it were. It's maybe an awkward metaphor, but kind of literally figuring out the composition, and I was kind of coming in to kind of shape and tweak and adjust things.
Does make sense. So to the extent you can, you said John served as the writer, you served as the director. What did John write? What was he getting after?
So we get the brief, Emerald and it's Ursula and the sort of big energy of this sort of singing moment. John initially moved right in to thumbnail out the first couple of options. We always start with a set of different possibilities for how the layout's going to look. And John really has a really great sort of sensibility for composition. Mm-hmm. And so literally just like posing and composing where Ursula is in frame and how Flotsam and Jetsam kind of frame her and where the poor unfortunate souls kind of come in at the bottom. All of that was kind of John's decision to sort of arrange in the way that it was. But it was very loose. So one of the main things that's different about John and I is that I tend to be a little bit more structured and meticulous in my process. And John is very chaotic and kind of gestural and vibes based. And so he just attacked it with like color and energy. But one of the things that we know for sure is that the whole game works best when there's that spark of recognition for the player and the collector, where it's immediately like, that's Ursula, right off the bat. And that's where I come in and have a little to offer on the process, where I think I can kind of capture the model and the look of that character a little bit more in a little bit more fine detail. And it's something that he can absolutely do, but he just doesn't find as much joy in. So it was easy to be like, oh, the thumbnail part kind of sometimes stresses me out, deciding on like the exact shot. And he was like, no problem. And for him, it was very much like figuring out like how to make Ursula's like minute facial features really work together to like really look like the character in the end. It's not his favorite part of the process. And for me, that's delicious. I get to dig into the old model sheets and look at the old kind of, Disney animators drawings and dig into that. So
that is so interesting.
Sort of 1, 2, and then the whole process was just then I passed it to him and he painted over that, and he passed it to me and I painted over that, and we just kind of did that until the deadline hit and the card was done, more or less.
That's so fun.
I was gonna say, it's so interesting because when you look at her face, you can kind of tell her face is a Nick Kole face. It very much looks like you, but when I saw this card, I saw the art before I saw that y'all did it. You can absolutely tell the face is a Nick Kole face. You can tell the brush strokes, especially on Flotsam and Jetsam, are John Loren brush strokes.
That's right. Totally.
It's got this like ethereal kind of vibe to it that I think he brings to a lot of his art. And so I do think it's this beautiful marriage between the two of y'all in your work.
Yeah, that's very much. I think that in particular he hit Flotsam and Jetsam pretty hard pretty fast, and it was just like, that's great, I don't need to do a whole ton. I did tweak a little bit of like the model in the face and everything. It was interesting to work with him because our processes are so different, that there are pockets of like panic or misunderstanding in the middle of it all, where you're just like, I don't know what to do. Wait, do you want me to, should you? And you're kind of stepping on each other's toes as dance partners, you know. You're like, I don't know if I'm going too far or if I'm removing something you love about what you just laid down. But because we've had like over a decade of friendship and like specific art crit back and forth, I don't think I could have done it with a lot of other artists sort of together in that way. But with John, it was so easy to just find our way through those awkward moments of like, maybe her face is maybe not. He's like, no, it's not great. Go for it. You know?
Yeah. Is there a platform, you know, I know kind of in the corporate world, you know, there's like a Google Doc where you're both in the Google Doc simultaneously. And I know my colleague's working on paragraph 4 and I'm working on paragraph 1, and we're both kind of furiously going at it together. Is there like a tool in the art world that's like that? Are y'all working on the piece simultaneously, or are you guys sending it, like he works on it and then he sends it to you and you work on it and then you go back and forth that way?
It was really the latter. There are tools like that. We could have maybe, I can't remember what the app is called. There is an app where you can draw simultaneously on the same canvas. There's things like Miro boards and stuff that, you know, depending on the gig we'll use. But for the real work, I think all of us take a lot of pride in our process and want to really fuss with the details and take our time too. And so like, sitting in the same document while somebody just, you know, meticulously renders suction cups on Ursula's tentacles, you know, is not necessarily like valuable use of each other's time. So it's something where we both kind of take our chunk, go away into our little like cave and fiddle with the details and then bring it back when we're at a point where either it's just too much time has spent, passed, and we have to move on to other tasks, or you hit a wall and you're just like, I'm not sure the next thing. And I'll do that with John anyways, you know, just on any given piece. When we hit walls, we tend to just text each other and be like, what's going on here? Show me, because I'm not sure.
What am I missing? Yeah.
So this piece is super cool. I think I love learning the history of it because it brings it alive. But speaking of, you know, a piece being alive, this piece is bonkers cool. And I think when people saw it, the energy, like it's just a must have for a lot of collectors. Out of curiosity, what does Ursula mean to you? Like, does that character resonate to you from your childhood? Like, is this a character that you're excited to draw?
Absolutely. I think that like, Ursula from my childhood was tricky because I was a problematic little tween boy of the 90s who was like, Little Mermaid is a girl movie, so I'm not gonna watch that one. And I think anytime that it was on, my little sister was like watching it when Ursula was on screen, suddenly I was interested, you know. It was like, okay, this is actually kind of cool. I grew out of that, you know, pretty fast, but there are some movies that I feel like I missed out on in the formative sort of moment. But I've grown to really respect that design in general as like, she's just one of the all-time greatest Disney villains, period. You know, I think there's like sort of a stable of several of them that are just like, they kind of transcend even the movies that they're in. You know, I think that Ursula's one of them where she's just so iconic. The colors, her design, the performance, her vocals, but also just the, when I say performance, the animators go so hard in really injecting every movement and every line read with a lot of sass and energy. So digging into her was just, you know, sometimes it's fun when you realize as a kid maybe you overlooked something, and then in the course of doing the card, you realize like, oh my gosh, this rules. Like, you know, this is great. I knew Ursula was going to be fun to begin with, but yeah, sometimes you discover it on the way.
That's fascinating. Speaking of, you know, Ursula and you know, you hit on some of it, like the facets of her personality, what makes her great. What of her personality, what of Ursula are you really trying to bring out with this piece and capture with this depiction of her?
Yeah, I think the moment that you know, everyone remembers so vividly is the song Poor Unfortunate Souls, and that she just dominates the screen and just, you can't look away the whole performance. Like, she just anchors that chunk of the movie completely, and she's the center stage diva that she was really designed to be. And so I think that was really the energy we were trying to capture here, was Ursula in all her glory, you know. And I think in this case, you know, there's the shell around her necklace where she's stolen the voice, and the implication is strongly that she's using someone else's voice to sing. So, you know, that's just kind of a fun conceptual moment. You don't actually see that happen quite that way in the film. Well, I guess you do, but she's transformed by that point. Yeah, it was very much, I really liked looking into the specific designs of the Poor Unfortunate Souls, the little like creatures, because I was always obsessed with any weird little monster, you know, on screen as a kid, and those just completely fascinated me. I would definitely like pause the movie and be like, oh, those are sick. Okay, cool.
They're so gross, but
they're so gross. Weird little worm people.
Speaking of them, the weird little worm people, you've made full use of the frame. You see them on the bottom of the card, and the way you've angled the design, the way we're looking at Ursula, it almost feels as if we are in the audience. We're one of those, you know, poor unfortunate souls, those cursed merfolk. Is that what you were going for with this piece a bit?
Definitely, yeah, definitely, yeah. So it's the audience, and kind of the seaweed is creating these kind of curtain shapes above, and the glowing single eyes of Flotsam and Jetsam are kind of creating these spotlights to all coordinate around this big moment of theatricality and performance.
You know, that's something I'm actually just noticing while we're sitting here talking, is like their
spotlights.
eyes are,
I missed it too until you said it.
Spotlights. That's incredible.
Yeah, that's a little one. I think because the center of the image got so much heat in terms of like bright white light, it gets a little bit lost. But both of them in the story, right? They only have the one eye that glows. Kind of links them as the two. So we had them arranged in such a way that we could use that as a visual element.
It's incredible.
No, I'm just now ogling the piece. I did want to ask a question about your career that you mentioned here that we didn't really dive into last time we had you on the channel, which is, you talked about, you know, in your the beginning of your career, you were a concept artist, like when you first worked with John. And we've since learned in the last year that Lorcana in Ravensburger works with several concept artists on pieces. Can you kind of talk about, in your own experience, what approaching a card as a concept artist, how that differs from approaching a card as like the full concept or the full card artist? Does that make sense? Am I phrasing that correctly?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question too. I think that, you know, there's both John and I have both worked as illustrators and concept artists on Lorcana. Concept, for the most part, on Lorcana means costume, sort of character design tweaks to find those Dreamborns, and then, of course, the Floodborn kind of looks for the characters. There's also a fair amount of concept that goes into sort of the environments and the new spaces and the inklands that people are discovering. And so as you pay more attention to kind of the backdrops, you'll notice some of the evidence of the work of a consistent vision that's kind of across those different cards. And especially with locations coming in, you'll see a ton of that as well. You know, I hope someday we could talk more and sort of show more about all the concept work that's going on behind the scenes, because there is truly like a feast of concept work that has gone into Lorcana, like a surprising amount. New artists come in and they're like, oh my God, you know, when they finally see what's going on. And but the concept work for Lorcana in general is like very focused on trying to tell a story that's going to come to the surface really beautifully visually. And with really strong theming, kind of across both like the different sets and the story that's happening under the surface, and then each like individual color and how that themes out into the characters. So there's a lot of considerations about like the shape language associated with each color that goes into concept work. You know, if Emerald has these serpentine twisty shapes that you're always seeing, Ursula's so easy with that because, you know, she's got tentacles and then, you know, 2 moray eels. So the twisties take care of themselves more or less. But in other contexts like games or movies, concept work has a different intention. In a film, you're working like an animated movie. A concept needs to perform really well. It needs to hold up under many different circumstances where, you know, you might zoom in on their foot or their hand, so you have to account for what that looks like. And you might even want to make sure that their hand looks distinct to them, so that if you're in a close-up, you really know which character it is that you're looking at. You are optimizing their face and their anatomy to make sure that as they act and perform, the animators are having a ton of fun and also getting a lot of range out of that character. That's one of the most important things in animated movies, is that acting and performance. In video games, not as much the case. So in video games, like the action that they're performing and the sort of, often it's combat, but it's not always that. It's sometimes just utility. If a character needs to make a big explosion, they need a huge cannon, and like, you know, whatever needs to happen in the design to sort of support that needs to happen. They have a really big fist or a huge hammer, or, you know, we start with functional elements generally first. And you're not as much worried about every different like up close angle on the character. You want a big clear impression from far away, so that you can see from far away in the heat of the moment in a video game, the big hammer guy just showed up, I gotta run, or I have to charge up this special whatever. It's really important to be able to react to a character design. So silhouette is more important, tends to be in video games. It's important across everything. I find that with Lorcana, the character design and concept work, kind of a balance between the two. You want it to reward like close inspection. You want people who really love the art and want to like pore over it and like look in it for the details, that they're rewarded for that time spent. So you want to work in all these hidden details and little elements that are cool. I think that in particular, when we're inventing new things for cherished characters, digging into the lore and story that they're from, it's really important. So finding ways to reference other elements of their movies and their sort of story worlds, you know, Seaweed and the shell necklace, and kind of using her two-tone hair as kind of this rocker kind of Joan Jett hairstyle. Like all of these different elements we're trying to bring in and make them feel like they really still come from the world of the Little Mermaid in a sense. And you really want it to make a big, strong impact on a card as much as possible, but it's not ever to obscure the recognizability of the character. So if I put Ursula in like a giant mask or headdress or something that just sort of took her face away, I would have to be really careful about how I did that to make sure that she's immediately still obviously Ursula. Because we found, I probably said this before with you guys already, but if you crack open a booster pack and you're flipping through the cards and you see a card and you're like, oh, I think that might be Aladdin. Is that Prince Eric? You've lost kind of the delicate balance of what makes Lorcana tick, you know? It's got to be immediately, that's Aladdin, love Aladdin, you know? So you want to make sure as you're handling these characters, you get that spark of recognition and nostalgia. So it's a delicate balancing act between wanting to make a big, novel, exciting impact, bring their story world into it, the new stuff that Lorcana's introducing, anything we want to tease or kind of hint at, and get that immediate recognition in a way that like sails through the approval process and gets us on the card. So it's its own really unique challenge, and I think the difference then between is taking that and showing it in a way that really demonstrates and showcases the best elements of a costume design on a card. So some of the ones that are great, I mean, Nico Saviori's Jafar card this set, incredible, so good. And he's a character, John and Nico and I have worked across like 3 or 4 projects now too. Crash, Spyro, Lorcana. I think John and him are both on Hearthstone with Blizzard too. They're both incredible character designers as well as illustrators, and Nico has killer character design chops. So you can see he's posed Jafar in a way that every element of the design that's important to him to show is like on display and used to its maximum extent. The silhouette really pops. The sand snakes like really like dynamically kind of create this composition that you just can't look away from. So it's an interesting balance to strike when you feel like you really put all this work into a design and you want to make sure on the card that all of that like shows up and lands, and you don't just cover it with like giant sparkly amethyst magic and then suddenly it's gone, you know.
So last question I can think of, is there anything you wanted to talk about on this card that we missed?
I think overall what's really exciting to me is in chapter 3 and then going forward, this is the beginning of the art team really pushing on the boundaries of what Lorcana as an art style looks like. And I know our art director Matt Ang has already spoken about this in an article, so I'm okay to talk about it a little bit. I think that this was meant to have this kind of oil painted classic Age of Adventure look that embodies this nostalgia and kind of the energy of exploration that was a really big part of Into the Inklands as a theme. And we're trying to apply that same kind of creative thinking going ahead for the Enchanted cards, so that there's variety for collectors who are excited for different art styles and maybe different takes, for the artists who want to kind of flex their muscles and do different stuff that kind of is to the left or the right of our like core central look. And I just was really excited by this one. The references that the art directing team put together of different oil paintings and the way different like in-game colors express themselves in the sort of subtle shifts in the art style. That was really cool. So getting to be more painterly in a classic traditional sense with this one was really fun. I really tried. What I got from John close to the end was a very beautiful, very gestural, very classic kind of John painting of Ursula, and I had this itch in the back of my mind because of the reference they had sent to really try and capture this underpainted oil look, which is all those little bits of orange, kind of like a burnt sienna kind of that you can see. It's part of this really time-honored oil technique where the first thing people will do is like glaze down an orange color across the whole canvas and slowly start to build dark and light values, and then on the top of that introduce greens and purples and a local color. And so you'll see the evidence of that process in how the paint is built up on a canvas. So if you look at old Dutch painters like Rembrandt and the like, you'll see the evidence of some of those under sketches. You'll see little bits of orange peeking through. And I really wanted to get that. So I basically took John's painting and like blurred it and sort of messed with it and scribbled all over it and turned it all orange and brought the canvas texture into it. And then took his painting again and kind of began to lay it in as if I was painting it over the top of the orange version, and then added a layer of different brush strokes over the top of that too. So that last part was like challenging, a little bit like too high effort, but I'm really glad that it paid off, and I think the result was cool. But we were really trying to find different interesting ways to like bring that particular new look to the surface. Since we've pretty well established what a Lorcana card like aesthetically looks like by now, it's fun to get to kind of explore what's outside that boundary.